in the 90s, that's when we saw the beginning of the tech boom,
Yeah.
the 90s and the 2000s. And what we see is that you also highlighted in the book, talking about the production, the how HBCUs and even
Oh, yeah.
PWI universities produced a lot of black tech graduates, but that was not reflected in the hiring of those graduates. And then we look at the H-1B visa. So I'm like, I mean, and we know that right now, I believe the current administration, they have been on record. I know Harris and Biden have been on record saying that they would like to remove the cap for the
Oh,
H1,
yeah.
the per country cap, which it already, as it stands now, you got the third highest country of H-1B visa recipients, I believe, is Canada, and the next one I think is Mexico. But number one and two, um, if you put those two together, they control, I think, 74, 75% of the H-1B visa recipients. And that's India by far with number, I think it's like 50 something percent, in China with 20 something percent. And nobody else even has over 1.1%. So, I'm looking at, when we talk about tech companies, and we see that they have an overwhelming representation, and we see an underrepresentation, the freedmen, and that's not to say we don't have the number of graduates. So could you kind of speak to that? Could you kind of speak to how um, immigration policy and has damaged on a higher, and it's not just tech. I just use that as one example.
Oh, yeah,
We
right,
talk
right.
about doctors,
Oh,
and you
oh,
broke it down in there. Could you kind of speak on that?
yeah. And of course, I'd say in there that I put most of my emphasis. And when I say lesser skilled jobs, I mean it's construction. I mean these aren't they used to be good jobs, right? So construction. There's still a lot, tons of construction jobs, and nobody should look down on that kind of work. But the thing is that's been denied. But yes, when we get into the college degree jobs, um, the uh, all of this talk about we've got a skill shortage. We've got a skill shortage. The H-1B program was started in 1990, and at the beginning they said we've we got all this technical industry growing, and we've got a short-term shortage, but we'll just use it for a while. Well, in the meantime, we're going to ramp up the education, and we're going to train Americans, and Americans can do it. Well, it never ended, and it just kept going more and more. And by the way, supposedly it's a 65,000 cap on H-1Bs, but there's all kinds of H-1Bs that they don't count toward the cap, so it tends to run 2 or 300,000 a year. Uh, and so, in the book, I've got some fairly recent stuff in the last 10 years where, uh, and I think you read a little bit from it last week. It's just incredible. I think the HBCUs uh, are graduating, like 18% of the something like that, like 18% of the people in these tech fields, but only a but only maybe 4%, 4% of the people with jobs in the fields are black. It's very clear that these corporations aren't interested. And what's interesting is they're not even interested. We say, well, they like Asians, but they're not even interested that much in Asian Americans. They Asian Americans get started, but then they replace them with people from China.
That's right.
It's just, and that is absolutely about cheaper labor. Uh, and because they'll bring these people over, they live, a ton of people in one house, and they work them. They have to work no matter what, 7 days a week, and if they complain, they get sent back. It's kind of it's like now, uh, freedmen are having to compete with sort of semi-slave. The freedmen with tech degrees have to compete with semi-slaves that
Hmm.
have been brought in from other countries. Well, that's
Damn, you calling it what it is?
that's not going to work, is it? Yeah. So yeah, yeah. I just I it was only at the very, I'd already written the book. I'd already recorded the audio book. And then I don't know, I went back to look at the 1972 Federal Bipartisan Commission on Immigration, 1972. And I'd always focused on one part of it, but I just happened into another part of it. And that's where I came, this is where I came up with that whole section where they were talking about disadvantaging native-born Americans coming out of colleges into these professions, and especially medical professions where we didn't have enough schools to turn out. You know, we had people qualified to be doctors, to go to medical school, but not enough slots. And so instead of building bigger schools or new schools, we imported doctors, and that's the one that showed it. And so isn't it interesting? This is just 7 years after the mass immigration started, and that commission was talking specifically about, I mean, at that time, almost every Black person, not all, but most of them were freedmen, but about Black Americans being especially disadvantaged by this. And I've back in the 90s, I had quite a bit of dealings with Black Americans that were in the tech industry. And that's when I got educated about the fact that Black Americans were overrepresented in the tech industry in the 80s. And, you know, you saw that in, what was the name of that space movie? The women that they called the computers with NASA.
Yeah,
Hidden
yeah.
Figures.
Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures.
And
Right.
let me say real quick, Roy, you've kind of seen that in movies in the 80s and the 90s where, you know, the quote unquote Black guy is like the computer
Jurassic
hacker,
Park.
right? Huh?
Samuel L. Jackson and Jurassic.
Right. What was Bad Boys with John Sally, and he pointed down at Martin Lawrence, and they start to beefing about something, right? He's the hacker.
Yeah.
And then everything just begins to change after. I want you to continue, but that was such a powerful point because it made me think about all of those early movies where a lot of Black people were depicted as actually like the computer guy, right? What's the movie Christmas, Bruce Willis, Die Hard, right? When the guys come in, it's the Black guy that's doing all of the technical stuff. You see what I'm saying? So
Terminator.
Huh?
Terminator 2, you know.
Yeah, that's right. So that's just really interesting that you say that, and we see it reflected. You know, we can see the difference now, even in the movies. You know, it's like life is. I mean, art is truly imitating life when it comes to particularly freedmen being replaced here in these fields.